Well, good morning, Connor.
Good morning, Irene.
Oh, I forgot to scooch my chair up, so hopefully I can be heard. I've got a cat on my lap, and hopefully he doesn't destroy everything before we start recording. I had mentioned to you before, let's do this out in the bigger room, but that would be worse, because then we'd have two cats out there. And there he goes off the desk. About 7 months ago, when I mentioned I was going to be starting a podcast, a descendant of the first folks that were married in Scottsbluff asked me if I was interested in the story, which, hello, it's me, yes. So this person gave me a little bit of information to get started, and it was a 1 3/4 page story of the first marriage. And I knew there was more information out there, and my job, my new job, your job, it all kind of prevented us from getting down to Legacy to get the information. And when we went, what was it, about 3 weeks ago? We went down there? I finally got the information, and then this past week I was able to start putting it all together, and I still had to do a couple of things online, which were mainly looking up gravesite kind of things. But it took a while to get to this story, but now that I know that the archivist volunteers on Tuesdays down at Legacy, and I'm hoping we can maybe fit that into our schedule to get down there Tuesday afternoons for whatever we need, because they'll get us whatever we need. It was just a matter of, again, your time, my time, and their time, getting it all together to work out.
Worked out.
So today on Storytelling on the Plains, we're going to discuss the first marriage in Scottsbluff and all the pitfalls surrounding the event, which almost didn't happen. And then as I got into the story, there were some things before. That is my cat chewing on my humidifier. So there were some interesting stories of how the Westervelts came out to Scottsbluff as well that I decided to include in the story too, because it's pretty cool and interesting. Stupid cat. So before we get to the big day, we need to do some background and tell a little bit about the happy couple, Claude Westervelt and Ada Gertrude Slates. The information I've gathered about their life before they were married comes from a recorded interview Claude did when he was 96, and I refer to this as the interview throughout today's podcast, and it's a partial transcript, which is all I had access to, and that transcript didn't give the name of the interviewer, but this person refers to Claude as Uncle Claude. And Rosie Burkholter wrote a short article for the museum in which the transcript is referred to as transcripts. So there's more than one. Jesus, cat.
He's not happy you're doing this.
Yeah,
today.
so sorry, folks. If you hear scratching, it's the cat. He's
trying to add dramatic emphasis.
Yes, there you go. So Rosie wrote that there were transcripts, so I'm assuming more than one, and I didn't have access to any of the recorded info. I just had the folder of information that they have, and she refers to the interviewer as Ted Westervelt, and that Claude was his great uncle. I'm still going to refer to him as the interviewer because I don't have a way to verify for sure that it was Ted in this interview. And the transcript just has Q for question and CW for Claude Westervelt for the answers.
Gotcha.
And because I don't really have a way to 100% verify it, I'm going to stick with interviewer instead of Ted. And, if some relative wants to go down and double check that, I'm sure they have it. Because the way Rosie wrote her thing, it implies that she had listened to those transcripts. So,
did you find any Westervelts that are still here in the county?
When I was doing the grave searches, I found some that have been dying up all along. It's a very bad way to...
that have been living up till...
Oh, God, I'm a terrible person. So I think there might still be some in the area. And that's the most that I looked, because I was trying to stick with Claude and Ada, and I didn't want to go too far down the Westervelt rabbit hole.
And names and last names can be famously marriaged off.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you just, if you have all daughters, it's kind of it for you.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. So the birth and death dates for both of them I took from 2 Ancestry.com related websites, as well as the headstones in the Fairview Cemetery in Scottsbluff, which is where they're buried. So Ada Gertrude Slates was born on October 28th, 1877 in Perrysville, Carroll County, Ohio. Her father, John Bartholomew Slates, was 20, and her mother, Angeline Amos, was 18. Young for today, but I don't think young for the time. Ada was the niece of Claude's brother, Jean's wife. So Ada was Jean's wife's niece. So I guess it made it Jean's niece as well. Yeah, we're going to get into this confusing bit as well throughout this whole thing. I can't tell you how many times I was going and double checking who's related to who and how. And some of the names are pretty important for when we get to the whole fracas that happened on the wedding day. Ada moved, the aunt lived here in Scottsbluff, and Ada moved here in 1899 to live with her, and that's how Claude met her. So Claude was born on September 11th, 1874 in Ionia County, Michigan, and I did quite a few searches, and I couldn't get a town, so maybe there wasn't one, you know.
Could have just been from a farm.
Yeah, and it's 1874, so...
It's very likely that there's just
that's it.
A random farm.
Yeah. So Claude's interview provided me with the details of how both Claude and Ada ended up in Nebraska. It took them a while to get out to Scottsbluff, but that's an interesting bit of history as well, which is why I'm planning on including it, because I thought it was kind of cool. And it's storytelling on the plains, a history of western Nebraska. So here we go. So Claude had 3 brothers, Jim, Gene, who I guessed and figured out later on Eugene, but everybody called him Gene, and Bill. And they'll come up a few times in Claude's story. So the family moved from Michigan. They took a train to Grand Island, Nebraska, and then purchased a team of mules and a covered wagon in which everybody rode in to get to Grand Island. Just outside of Grand Island. Anyway, we'll get to it. An interesting side note, at this point in time, the interviewer asked if this was the time when Gene got his toe chopped off, and Claude replies, no. And they go back to talking about their travel from Grand Island. And I'm going, wait.
It does make me wonder if it was indeed the relative, because it just kind of seems there's some
there's a bit of family
things,
knowledge there.
Like, how would a random interviewer know the guy's toe got chopped off?
Yeah,
you know?
and later on, the interviewer was referring to the fact that they wanted to get Uncle Claude on tape for somebody's birthday and give it to him as a gift, because Uncle Claude had a great memory and nobody ever got his story down on tape. So I'm going, they're related. So yeah, I think it is, Ted.
I'm sure there's some family.
But for whatever reason, it's only a partial transcript down at Legacy, and the very beginning of it just kind of jumps right into the story like you and I would. You know, we had a conversation 2 days ago about Story X, and when I see you 2 days later, oh, how did X work out? You know, we know what we're talking about, yeah. But if nobody had been there for that previous conversation, they wouldn't know what we were talking about. So
no, and talking from my own personal family, on my dad's side, we only have one like real family historian, at least what I would consider my family historian, which is my aunt. And then on my mom's side, I don't think we have anybody. So it's very, it's kind of interesting. You finally realize, oh no, uncle or grandpa's turning this age. I need to get some information down. And you write it down, and then, stuff happens. Especially if it was a paper transcript,
Yeah.
gets put in boxes, gets...
And even a
around.
recording, if you're not a trained journalist, you wouldn't think to add things in, because they all know Gene got his toe chopped off. Well, here I am. This guy was 96 at the time, so it was late 80s. No, wait, he was born in 74. Anyway, late 60s, I think the interview was. They know about Gene's chopped off toe, so they're not asking questions. They know how it happened, but they didn't know when. And so Claude was just like, yeah, no, that's not when it happened. Okay. And they go back to talking about something else, and I'm going, I want to know about the toe. Because here I am coming along 50-some years later, reading this, going, well, what happened? That's interesting to me. How did that happen? But, that's just the nature of things.
That could also be one of those things that if I lost a toe right now and I made it to 90-some years old, you would never get the same story straight from me. It would be a different story every day. I sold it. Aliens took it. I had a barter with somebody for my freedom, and that was the only thing they'd accept. You name it.
And see, me on the other end, the day that it happened, while I'm in the emergency room, I'm going to be taking notes of what the emergency room looks like.
Exactly
and,
what happened.
Yes.
Get the story straight.
And so the story of me losing a toe in that case would be, like a 3,000-word story of my day.
Oh, I guarantee you if it was me, the truth would be way too embarrassing to admit. I would never admit the truth.
I'm sure my story would be either... So, my day with Paul started out okay. And then I would blame him through the whole thing. So anyway, they went from Grand Island to Broken Bow, which today is about a 90-minute car ride away. And Google Maps tells me it's an 8-hour bike ride. And I always do the bike ride for these because I equate bike and horse for roughly similar speeds. And then it's a 26 to 29-hour walk, depending which way you go.
Not to sidetrack, but interesting.
Really? We never sidetrack.
Never sidetrack. But if you go out to Harrison and Chadron and all the way up through Valentine, the old railroad track that used to go up there is now a bike trail.
Yeah.
And you can bike all the way there. So you, and I know people who've done it, and it takes roughly 2 days to get from Harrison to Valentine by bike.
I like my car.
For people who don't know, it's about 115 miles or so.
Yeah, it's
from here to Valentine.
It's a good long ride.
Which Valentine's about middle Nebraska, more or less.
Yeah.
Somewhat in the middle of Nebraska. So to give you guys a good idea.
Yeah, it's a long trip. Anyway, I started thinking about other things.
Well, I was to say you go slightly south and you'd go to Grand Island. So, I mean, it's about the same distance. I guess is what I was getting at. So if anyone wants to experience that.
Yeah, feel free, and then let us know how your really long bike ride was. Irene's not doing it. Irene will follow you in a car and take pictures of you on your bike, but Irene's not doing that bike ride.
We'll just meet you in Grand Island.
So according to this article, according to the interview, they settled in a little town called Westervelt, which is family named. And here I think the interviewer and Claude got a little things wrong because repeated searches came up with the name Westerville. The documents on the family at Legacy, Westerville, and then there's a state marker in Westerville about it. So maybe because the family's been in Scottsbluff for so long, they still think it was Westervelt, but it's Westerville. I don't know. That's one of those little quirks of history.
Or was it one of those things at the time, it sounds fancier doesn't it? Doesn't it
Yeah.
sound like a Rockefeller kind of name? Right when you said Westervelt, I thought of a very well-off rich family, so that could very easily be, hey, we're Westervilles now, we're Westervelts. We're the famous people.
Either that or they called it Westervelt, but everybody else called it Westerville, and that's what stuck. I don't know, because even the historical marker didn't give me a lot of information for a type of confusion. But
to me, it sounds like they spiffied up their name, like the Vanderbilts, the Westervelts.
Could be. I don't know. I don't know.
Sounds fancy to me.
And when I was doing some research on that as well, what was the name of the company? His brother, Gene, I believe it was, started some kind of environmental foresting company, something. Anyway, it still exists today, and I just kind of marked it in the back of my mind to go and do something later on with it. So I think they would have to have some money to keep traveling back and forth by train. I don't know. There wasn't any conclusive evidence, because here's Claude saying, no, the town's name was Westervelt, and all the historical documentation says Westerville. Maybe it was Westervelt Village, and it got smushed together. Who knows? I'm just making assumptions.
Yeah.
Because
Istanbul was once Constantinople kind of thing.
If you sing that song and it gets stuck in my head, I will find you.
I will find you.
So anyway, if you get to read the transcript, it's funny here because they both then start arguing about how far Westerville is from the more well-known towns, and they're going, oh, it's this far east of, was it Ansley? No, Broken Bow, and then, oh, but it's kind of north from Grand Island. Oh, but it's really northwest. Oh, but if you go this way, it's not quite northwest, it's more north. And they had this little argument about where it's at. So I actually went and looked it up on the map, and Westerville is still a town there.
Oh.
And it is slightly northwest. So I'll go with the interviewer because he did say slightly northwest in the transcript. And Claude was like, no, it's more north. Okay, dude, calm down. Whatever. Just get a map and follow the road. So Claude and the family arrived in Broken Bow in 1879, and then they left for Scottsbluff in 1886 or 1887. He wasn't completely sure. Claude's father decided to leave Broken Bow because he had asthma, and he believed the drier air in western Nebraska would allow him to breathe better. Claude said his father's asthma seemed to clear up and never bothered him again after they moved to Scottsbluff. And the interviewer and Claude surmised that the asthma was hereditary because Jean, Jim, and Claude also had asthma. And I'm going to read a little bit here, a quote from Claude. I noticed when Father had it, and before he died, he was quite a smoker, Father was. Smoked a pipe. After he quit smoking, just before he died, that asthma left him. Gene had it, and the same thing with him. Before he died, he quit smoking, and the asthma left him too. So I'm thinking that smoking aggravated the asthma. Anyway, it's a little bit of conflicting evidence whether or not Scottsbluff or not smoking cures asthma.
It's not Scottsbluff. I'm sorry, I was raised here all my life and I had asthma. It's not Scottsbluff.
Oh, so Claude also quit smoking and his asthma went away. So he finally admitted in the transcripts that, it was probably the smoking. So when the family decided to come over to Scottsbluff, they did so via wagon. Jim had a team of oxen he drove. Gene had a team of mules. And Claude said the oxen were steers and added that they were what they call an ox team. There was steers that were yoked to drive and drove them just like they did horses. I knew I was going to struggle with that sentence because the transcript is actually how he talked, which isn't proper English. But anyway.
I always had a question. So if you get a team of mules, how do you just get a new mule after one dies? I mean, it's not exactly like you can raise them.
Oh God, I hadn't thought about
I mean,
that. Yeah, I would assume you'd have to go. You got
find another mule somewhere.
You'd either have to go buy one off of someone or plan ahead.
Well, I suppose, yeah, have a donkey and a horse and somewhere.
Yeah.
And I guess I didn't think of it that way, but I was just thinking, it's like, if you have a team of mules, it seems like that's
Yeah, because you need, And that just made me think of the story I did when I worked at the paper. There was a bunch of retired guys. They were in their 70s and 80s, just decided, let's do the Oregon Trail. So they did. And when they came through town, a couple of the guys had mules.
Yeah.
And they were a team of 2. So, yeah.
They are very strong. I mean, I've seen mules. Well, even donkeys are really strong, but mules are ridiculously strong.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, I guess, it's not too far from Broken Bow to here that both donkeys would have made it. Mm-hmm. If you're doing the whole trail, then you'd be kind of screwed. But they were just going from Broken Bow to Scottsbluff, so...
Yeah. That's still, I just looked it up on the map. That's still quite a bit of a distance.
Yes, and I have it written down here coming up. I didn't. I think, maybe. I know I was planning on write it down, but yes, it is quite the hike. Oh, I didn't write it down because he tells the story of going without water, which we're about to get to. So Claude described the yoke as being wooden and that it came down around under their necks, but they got to go from the top of their heads to the back of their necks. So
the device that basically straps them into the wagon is called the yoke. Yeah, right? Is that?
Yes, yeah. And again, neither you or I are ag people. He made a point of saying that it was a wooden yoke, so I assume that was significant, so I included it.
Yeah. I suppose. I don't.
I mean, I know what a yoke is, but I don't know why he made a point of saying it was wooden. Yeah.
First maybe casted.
Yeah, I don't know. So as they left Broken Bow, Claude remembers it was awful dry and hot. It was awful dry and hot, and we went all day without any water, and all night, and all the next day. That's when we left Sydney. So now I'm curious why they went that way, because I don't know what the trails were like at that time, and Claude made this trip when he was 13, so it would have been 1887. Mm-hmm. My brain, stuck in 2023, was thinking, Highway 2's quicker. But, this is 1887, so they went from Broken Bow to Sydney. And granted, you can make the trip to Scottsbluff that way as well. You would head, I don't know what the highway number is, but you would head south and then you would pick up I-80 over to Sydney.
Yeah, well, it was my guess that they would probably be looking for the Platte. So they'd probably head south for the Platte, then follow the Platte west.
Okay.
And in that way, you would probably get pretty close to Sydney, mm-hmm. would be my guess.
And then not far from there was a place Claude named as Freeport, where a lake was located east of town. And Freeport was a town in Banner County, Nebraska. So I'm trying to figure that out because I don't think Sydney is in Banner. And if it was east of Banner, some of those things don't quite line up for me. But he said the cattle came to some water there, and this is another fun story I'm going to read to you in Claude's words. A little east of Freeport, you come to a little lake there, and the cattle hadn't had any water for a day and a night in hot weather. When they seen that water, they just started to run. Jim tried to stop them, but he couldn't. They just run. They run right into it, wagon and all. It could have been deep, but it wasn't. It was a shallow lake and didn't hurt anything, but they got out in there and they stirred up the water. And he and the interviewer had a little bit of conversation about how bad that would have been if it had been deep water, because no more oxen.
And what they call a little lake, we probably call a big pond.
Yeah.
This is Nebraska, folks. We don't have a lot of lakes out here, let alone little or big.
Yeah.
We've got big ponds.
So he said that, it was pretty much 2 days they went without water. So my guess is, I mean, it's going to take longer than 2 days with some oxen to walk from Broken Bow to Sydney.
Yes. I just went over this with my partner about biking, about how long would it just take just to bike from A to B.
Yeah.
And we usually come up with a few days. And I was still doing 8 to 13 hours of riding a day.
So, and I don't know what the trails were. I'm not an expert on the trails out here, but they apparently went for 2 days without anything, both the humans and the animals. So,
and that's perfectly realistic to think that happened. Absolutely. And even longer.
Yeah.
And there were some tricks, that I don't even know if Claude's family knew them, but the pioneers certainly did, and the natives certainly did, how to get water, either from extracting it from the ground or eating it from cactuses and trying to get it from other sources, because we do have prickly pear native cactuses here. So if you're in a pinch, people, and you're out in the middle of the plains, look for those prickly pear cactuses. They are full of water.
I'm going to have to be awfully thirsty to go near those.
Don't worry, these guys, I'm sure they were.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure Claude knew that trick. But certainly he would have known how to dig a well if he needed to. But of course, traveling, that's not always a viable thing to do.
Yeah. So some of the recorded interview is difficult to follow, at least on the transcript. There's blank underlines where words are missed. Sometimes I can guess what was going on, but sometimes the information isn't there and I can't. And the interview itself seemed to just start in the middle of a topic, and the transitions between topics aren't well defined. And again, that's like what we were talking about earlier. I think part of it is my brain and my late 20th, early 21st century knowledge of grammar, writing, and interviewing plays into my frustration. And I don't think it's the entire recording either. And just for me, it was a bit jarring because it would take me out of the story Claude was telling. I would have asked way more questions about this lake, what happened, they don't discuss anything about the humans drinking. He makes a point of saying the humans and the animals hadn't had anything to drink. And yeah, it's a great and funny story to think of, your oxen all just hightailing it towards this lake to drink out of it. And then they start on another topic. And I'm going, did the humans drink from that lake too? How did you get what? How long did you go without water?
He's alive, so maybe it was a mute point. It's like, well, obviously you got water somehow because you're still here.
Yes. So it's just, I think that's...
Again, makes me think it's family, because of that. For a family member would have been a stupid question. For an interviewer would have been a smart question. But for a family, it's like, your uncle's right here.
Yeah.
Of course I found water.
And of course, they may have already heard the story of
I'm sure they did.
Claude going without water and how they got water. So
I'm sure the whole reason this interview came about, like you said, is because Uncle Clyde is full of good stories.
Yeah.
And he doesn't shut up, and he keeps telling us these stories, and we probably should write him down before he kicks it.
Yes. So on the flip side, like we just talked, if it's a relative, they're not doing that. And I'll also cut Claude some slack, because as with any interview, and I'm dealing with an interview I just did, nobody talks linearly. If you suffer from trauma, you don't recover from it linearly. It doesn't come back. This happened, then this happened, then this happened. It comes back not in order. So I'm cutting Claude some slack there because, he's human. And then he was also 96 years old. And even though he was reported to have a sharp memory, he's human.
Has a sharp human memory.
There you go. And that's just not how our brains work in general. I have never conducted an interview where, if I asked you, what did you do this past week, Connor? you're not going to tell me in order. You're not going to be like, on Monday I did this, on Tuesday I did this, on Wednesday I did this. You're going to get till Thursday, and then you're like, oh man, I also did this thing on Tuesday. It's just the way your brain works.
Oh, yeah.
So there's a whole lot of factors playing into some of the stuff in the recorded interview and the transcript. It just frustrates my brain. So there's also a little bit about the Scottsbluff National Monument that I found interesting. Again, this was a little confusing in the transcript, and I think if you knew Claude and you knew the history, it would make a bit more sense, but there's bits that are left out that I tried to piece in. Claude spoke about how they used to walk up the bluff, which we all know people used to walk up the bluff. And on one particular occasion, right after Gearing got the county seat, there was some plan to have a bonfire to celebrate. And he said there were some cow punchers up there. I left that out because it was like a random throwaway sentence, and I don't know what the point of the cow punchers were. And to me, I'm taking that phrase literally. I don't know what a cow puncher is. So I'm going to read from what Claude said here. There was lots of dead timber up on top of the bluff at that time. Got a big pile up to have a big fire for the occasion. There was just one vote in Mitchell Valley for Gearing to have the county seat, and we made a little fire for him over there. So apparently the person who voted for the county seat to be in Mitchell Valley, they went and made a bonfire for that one dude.
Up on the monument.
No, the way it reads, they went to Mitchell Valley and made it for him over there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But they went up and over the monument.
Yeah, so this is Claude doing a little sidetrack that he's talking about. They're planning to do it on the bluff, but he's making a sidetrack. Oh, there's this dude that voted in Mitchell Valley for it, so we went and we did one for him too. Again,
maybe that was during. Well, you said it was during the time Gearing got the county seat, and we just talked about how contentious that was.
Yeah, in the last episode,
how the county fair got put. Maybe that had something to do with it.
So, and again, they don't probe deeper into that. So Claude continues to say, "We got the thing all fired up, probably bigger than this room here. A lot of wood." Okay. We left two fellas up there to light it when it got dark, and the rest of us all came back down to Gearing. So here I think he's mixing the two stories. They got to me it reads, they got a big fire built for the dude in Mitchell Valley, and then they're here in Scottsbluff on top of the bluff, and they built another big bonfire. And then they left a couple of guys up top to light it when it got dark.
Yeah.
So we're, at this point in time in the story, we're on top of the bluff. Bonfire's ready to go. We just need these two dudes to set it on fire.
For a couple cow punchers just to come light that bonfire.
I don't know what the hell a cow puncher.
For those who need to, cow puncher is a name for a stable hand.
Oh my god!
People who take care of cows. Cow wranglers are known as cow punchers, stable hands. So that's what a cow puncher is. It's just. Oh my god.
I'm just a city girl. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a slang. It's just a slang term.
So
you caught me off guard because I have not heard that for a very, very long time. It's
well,
like a cow puncher.
He was 96 when he said this, so yes, it's a very, very old interview.
It's an old
So we waited and waited and waited, and no one came and no fire started. And pretty soon these fellas come down, and they said that cow punchers from Mitchell Valley come up and said if they lit that fire, they'd throw them off the bluff. So they were like, yeah, we're not starting any fire.
Wow.
So according to Claude, those men left and went home, and Claude and his friends walked up the bluff and lit the bonfire. And he said he was about 13 years old when he did this. So,
and they didn't throw him off.
No.
See, I honestly think that was probably part of that contention we were talking about. I mean, what else could it have been?
Yeah.
Yeah, I bet you it had to do with the Gearing County seat and the Mitchell Valley Fair and all that.
Yep.
rivalries here, guys. Ugh.
Enough to throw people off the bluff.
We just burn, the good old S in the football field, and then Garen gets us and gets the G in our football field, and that's usually where we leave it.
Yeah, just burn it in effigy. You don't hurt anybody. We're good to go. So this apparently wasn't an issue because, if you or I go up there and set a bonfire today, we're going to prison. But again, it's still, 20, 30, almost 40 years before the monument becomes the monument. So it's just the bluff.
And as we just talked about, there's not a lot of water. So what are you going to do? Hike buckets up there to put it out?
Yeah.
Once you start it, you don't have much of a choice. You just kind of have to let it burn out.
Yeah. And Claude said there were only 2 or 3 or 4 buildings in Gearing, and then in Scottsbluff it was all dry land, and there was no irrigation or anything, and the river was a mile wide and you had to ford it. Gearing said, if you locate the county seat here, we'll build a bridge across the river, and they did. So that's a bit more to that story as well. But it wasn't a big deal to set the bonfire because you got a couple buildings in Gearing and nothing in Scottsbluff. Who's going to yell at you?
No, and once you were up there, I mean, even if the whole monument caught fire, the small bit of brush and everything, it would have been contained. I don't think anyone was really worried about it.
Yeah. So during the interview, they also had a little bit of a side talk about fording a river and being careful that your wagon box didn't float away because the dams were just being built, and they had a conversation about the dams and which order the dams were built, kind of like we do when we have our conversations. We just kind of go down those rabbit trails. I chose not to go down that here because we're still working on getting to the wedding.
Yes, and we will do one on rivers because we are going to get onto that subject. So
you're researching that right now. Yep. So the family's now moved to Scottsbluff, and Ada comes along. Claude meets her, and they plan to get married on August 12th, 1900. I'm so glad I know the date because I wrote it wrong, and I'm glad I remembered the date. But there was a big mishap with a suitcase that almost prevented the marriage from happening.
Dun, dun, dun.
So we could always be like, hey, let's wait till next week. But no, we're,
folks.
But
Bye,
bye, see ya. We might finish later. No, we're going to finish it now. I'm going to try and be as clear as I can with relatives helping out to clear up the mishap because there were several folks involved in trying to sort things out. And I might repeat myself in naming folks just so that everybody's clear what's happening. And I'm going to rely on 2 written documents, one by Estelle C. Laughlin and one by Rosie Burkhalter, who I referenced earlier. A third source was in the history of Western Nebraska and its people. And I note this now because I sometimes forget to put my notes at the end of the Patreon page when I post it. And I want to make sure it's noted where I found this stuff. So we're here to talk about a wedding. According to Laughlin's article, a lot of people were leaving the Broken Bow area at the time the Westervelts were leaving. Many of them, including A.B. Wood, who started the Gearing Courier newspaper, came from Broken Bow or nearby. And I'm going to read a quote from Laughlin's article. Claude and his father set up a blacksmith shop in the town of Gearing. Jim had a dentist's training and set up a roving shop. Gene, who had obtained a home for his little family by constructing what was commonly called a dugout in a high bank and building it out to the front with logs, went about his work as an early sheriff, courier employee, and early Republican agitator. I love how he's a Republican agitator, not just, he was politically involved or politically active. He was an agitator. His wife often recalled that she and the 4 children were left alone for days at a time while Jean was absent on business, and with her housework done, she had ample time for reading and read everything she could put her hands on. So again, I really want to know what she read and what she did with that knowledge, and the topic changes. please, if you ever document your family's histories, put that stuff in. Someone like me 100 years from now is going to want to know that information.
Yeah.
So when the Burlington Railroad built into Scottsbluff in 1900, there was an exodus of people across the river. Gene Westervelt was one of these, and Gene, in case you've forgotten, is Claude's brother. And by this time, he had built a frame house, and he had his frame house moved over that new bridge that Gearing built, and located the house into what is now known as West Overland in Scottsbluff. The writer mentioned the house specifically as it was to be the scene of the first wedding in Scottsbluff. So that's why that's in there, but it's also an interesting tidbit of information because we know not everybody, but a sizable chunk came over to Scottsbluff, and they literally lifted their buildings up and brought them over that bridge. Mm-hmm. And so at least here's a documentation of one person who did it instead of just a story. Lots of people did this. Gene Westervelt did it. So the writer in this case is Lachlan, and that's also another way to write things. Instead of putting I into a story, you can use the writer, and I just prefer I because then people know it's me. When you write the writer, especially if you're sourcing your story from other sources, well then does the writer mean me, or does it mean someone from one of my other sources?
Exactly.
So I like to use I, so that way the reader knows it's me that is saying this. So the article also mentions that Claude met Ada in Broken Bow, not Scottsbluff. Again, we're looking at 1899 when they met. Claude's telling this story when he's 96 years old, and I believe Lachlan wrote this story 70s, 80s. I mean, so you're coming up against old stories. Mm-hmm. Minor details like that doesn't really matter. No, they met each other, they decided to get married, and she was originally from Broken Bow, so was he, whatever. He liked her, and they wanted to get married. So they set the date of August 12th, 1900, and Ada is in Broken Bow. I could not find any information of why she's back in Broken Bow because Claude told us she was living in Scottsbluff with her aunt. Whatever. Get on a train, go to Broken Bow, go to Scottsbluff. Who cares? She's in Broken Bow at this point in time. Mm-hmm. Claude packed his wedding suit in a soon-to-be infamous suitcase and boarded a train to Broken Bow along the newly finished Burlington train on August 11th. So we're at the day before the wedding. When he reaches Ada's home in Broken Bow, he learns that his sister-in-law, Jean's wife, had written to the Slate family and said, I want Claude and Ada to be married in my home in Scottsbluff in West Overland. Why did no one tell the groom? You know?
Information probably just didn't get around to it.
And that was something I couldn't find out either because the article that I read said Ada's sister Della and her husband Conrad B. Snyder had already left for Scottsbluff. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing maybe Telegram. And they made the decision. They were like, all right, let's go. And maybe Claude was already on the train. I don't know. I couldn't find any information of why did he go to Broken Bow, because it makes zero sense if his sister-in-law's going to make sure everything takes place in her house.
Yeah, I would chuck it up to bad communication.
Yeah.
And just, even if you even lived, let's say, 10, 12 miles outside of Scottsbluff, or outside of the railroad, it was going to take you some time to get there, and you weren't going to come every day just for the mail. So you probably just missed the mail.
Yeah, who knows? So anyway, regardless, Ada and Claude are in Broken Bow, and they need to get back to Scottsbluff for the wedding the next day. So are you ready to get confused with names? Because I'm still trying to figure out the Amos folks, their last name was Amos. They were somehow related as well, and that got to be a bit confusing, so I tried to keep it as simple as possible. So Jim, Claude's brother, was married to Edith Sayer. Jean was married to Laura Bell Amos. Her sister, Nora Viola Amos, was married to Eli Armstrong. Those are the names that we need to know. When I started going down the family trees, I was confusing myself, and I'm going, nope, I'm just keeping to the people that are in the story about the wedding. Mm-hmm. So Eli gets everybody up really early on the 12th. So it's wedding day. He gets them up really early to catch the train back to Scottsbluff. I'm not sure what the delay was, but because apparently they got up really early, but they still didn't get to the train station on time. When they reached the train depot, the train had already arrived. And I'm not sure how many of our listeners have ridden trains before, but they have schedules to keep, and they're not waiting for you.
Yeah, no, they don't wait very long.
No.
Not at all.
And if you're fortunate to be in a bigger city or somewhere in Europe, if you miss a train, it's going to come along a couple minutes later. It's even not that bad of a wait in New York City. The Sunday schedules, I think it's every 15 minutes instead of every 2 or 3 minutes.
Wow, that's not bad at all.
Yeah, but I have been on trains before, and I've been on boats before, particularly in Tanzania, where if you miss it,
and come back,
it's 3 days.
Yep.
So they're late because the train's already at the station. And Eli runs ahead of everybody to hold the train so they can get on board before it goes away. Eli has Claude's suitcase in his hand. Why does Claude not have his suitcase? Because Claude is a gentleman, and he grabbed Ada's suitcase and then grabbed her arm, and the two of them are running toward the train. So he's got Ada's suitcase. Eli grabbed his. He ran ahead, held the train, so everybody could get on there. And I'm going to refer back to Lachlan's article again for a second. Eli ran ahead with the groom's suitcase to hold the train, and the groom, carrying his lady's suitcase, grabbed her by the arm, and they ran pell-mell over the wooden sidewalks, making a great clatter as they passed the Taylor Music Conservatory and Photograph Studio. On they raced across the bridge over the muddy creek and finally cut across from the water tower to the depot platform, just in time to board the train as it huffed and puffed smoke and tooted for latecomers to hurry. Eli hastily wished them much joy, and they were seated on the train, still panting, but heading west through the sandhills for Alliance. So, yay, everybody's going to the wedding. I like this quote because it names some of the businesses that were there that they ran past, and you get a little bit of, they're making lots of noise running over the wooden sidewalks, and everybody's on the train. It's also, the train's going to stop in Alliance, and there was a little offshoot train, so like the train stopped in Alliance, and then I think it went back toward Broken Bow. But they had to transfer trains, and it was just like this little tiny commuter train to get you down here to Scottsbluff at the time. And that would be neat today if that rail line was still working. Think about, yes, I know it's not far of a drive, but if I could go to Alliance to do something, or if someone from Alliance wanted to come down here to get something, a lot easier if you've got a train than a car. Mm-hmm. Unless you're going to Menards and you're buying tons of lumber. But, if you just want to come down and get some groceries or whatever, come down, go to a movie.
Yeah.
That'd be neat, but it's not there. That goes
hand in hand with the progress of America.
Yeah.
How we automatically give up the old for the next best thing.
Yeah. And there was a big push after World War II to drive your car around America and killed the train system. So
And if you had a car, why would you have a train? I think that's most people's logic. Why would I wait when I can just hop into my car and go? Mm-hmm. Whereas nowadays, especially if you go to Japan or places like areas where it just makes more sense to get around in trains. You start to realize, like, oh yeah, maybe it wouldn't have been such a bad idea to keep trains where we're at. But
and like next year or the year after, my husband and I are planning a trip to France, and I've been there several times, and I don't mind driving there, but France is loaded with toll roads.
Yes.
And I grew up on the East Coast, so I'm used to toll roads. But there was still those times where you're driving, you're like, la, 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 35-cent toll in 1 mile. And you're like, oh, crap, and you're trying to find money. And now most of it's automated, but I'm not from there, so I've still got cash. So which line do I get in? So there's a little bit of panic, and that's me in a place I grew up where I'm used to tolls. Now you're going to chuck me into another country, and it's in French. And I do speak crappy French, but it's still, I don't want to deal with that. And I've taken the rails around France enough that it's not that hard to figure out. And
it's wonderful.
Everything except for going to Normandy, you're right there. Because that's how Europe was built. You're right there where you need to go. And for that, we can, hire a cab or Uber or whatever. Because I don't really want to walk 5 miles from the train station to Normandy Beach. But it's so much easier, and it would still be easier here, but we as a country decided not to go that way.
No. Although we're starting to look backwards.
Yeah.
with the green movement and everything. So we'll see.
We'll see what happens.
It has been introduced, as you probably may have heard, the guy that owns Virgin West. What's his name?
Oh, Richard, my husband's going to hit me because I can't remember his name.
Richard Virgin. The Virgin guy, but he famously wants to do a jet, what do you call them? Bullet train. A bullet train system from east to west coast, I believe, was one of his big goals that he wanted to accomplish.
That's going to be expensive.
Yeah. Well,
it'd be cool, though.
Unfortunately, a lot of his progress has been tied back for his, little joyrides up into space. But never mind.
Yeah.
Never mind.
Yeah. Forget about helping out the little man. Let's just go for a joyride in space. I mean, granted, a joyride in space is cool, but
his wasn't even the coolest.
No.
He didn't get up that far.
Yeah. And me personally, if I had that kind of money, I'd be giving it away to help other people. Would it be cool to be able to go up into space like that? Yeah. But when I have that kind of money and I can make somebody's life better, I would much rather do that.
Yeah. Well, it's just like the documentaries, that's what they're there for. Can watch them about space, just like I watched them about the Titanic. Don't got to go nowhere.
Yeah, I don't need to go in a hastily built machine that I'm going to implode in. So everybody's on this train, and they're going to make it on time. And I'm thinking, Ada and Claude are on the train. It's their wedding. If they're not there on time, there's not going to be a wedding.
That's true.
So who cares? And then why rush so much? Just have it on the 13th. Why do you have to have it on the 12th? I don't know. It might have been a special day. Who knows? But my husband would say that's too much faffing about, and we can wait a day. But again,
back then,
it's 1900, so yeah, they
get everything in the right spot.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, the 13th was a Sunday as well. Whatever.
Because that's what I was going to ask next. Is like, what day was it on? Was it on a Sunday?
I think it was on a Sunday. And anyone who ever wants to go read this story about how my husband and I got married, everything I just said makes total sense. So everyone's chilling out on the train, and they're thinking, yeah, it's cool. We're going to get married tonight. It's nothing to worry about. They get to Alliance, and they go to change trains, and they realize Eli never put Claude's suitcase on the train. So again, I say, so what? You're not naked. Get married in what you're wearing. Again, that's me. talking 123 years later.
I think there'd be a lot of brides that are listening to this already that are rolling your eyes pretty hard at you. It's no, like my husband, looks his best on most days, is not nowhere near coming to my wedding. Like, he better be in a suit.
So, much like today, there's not much you can do at this point. Laura Bell, who was Jean's wife, who organized the whole shebang, had this all planned out for Sunday evening. Claude didn't want to get married in a regular suit. He had to have his wedding suit. So everything I've read, it's really Claude. He's like, I can't get married next to this woman in this awesome dress and look like a dirtbag.
So he understands. He completely understands.
He had to have his wedding suit. And let me just say, I think a good majority of women would still marry him in whatever he was wearing if that's how it ended up. I know there's some women out there that'd be like, we're going to wait till tomorrow.
Irene doesn't watch a lot of TLC or Lifetime drama shows.
No.
Otherwise, I'm not sure you'd make that statement.
I probably still would make that statement, but like have some kind of qualifier to it. So, I don't know. I just wouldn't care about it. But we know Claude wasn't having it. He wanted his wedding suit. So Jean told Claude not to worry and he would figure out a way to get the suit, which is kind of cool of your brother. Lachlan's article says everyone was certain Eli put the suitcase on the next train to Alliance, but I couldn't figure out how Lachlan determined this. Did they guess? I don't know. I just have no clue. I mean, it would make sense because I have been with Paul one time when we were in London. It was super, super packed, and I managed to get on the train before he did, and I turned around, and the doors closed, and he's standing there with his hands up, and I just pointed the direction the train was going, and we kind of both understood, I'm getting off at the next stop, I'll catch on the next train.
Yeah.
And
and you're talking about the underground, right?
Yeah.
What we would call the subway.
Yeah.
Not to be confused with the trains out here.
Oh, yeah.
Which are not subways, guys. These are not subways.
Yeah,
These
they're
are not
trains.
Places that just stop and go.
But my point was, I just made a finger gesture, and he knew I'm getting off at the next stop. Mm-hmm. He can too, and then we'll be back together, and then we'll finish our journey together. So
it's funny, that was our safety too when I went to Europe. That was the thing. If you ever got separated and you realize it right away, get off on the next stop.
Yep.
And then we'll regroup and we'll try it again.
Yep.
So
And so that was where my brain went, was maybe that's what they thought, that the train pulled away, Eli realizes he's still got the suitcase, and so he hung around waiting for the next train and chucked it on the next train. In post 9/11 world, that's probably not the best thing to do, but we're talking 1900, and you chuck the suitcase on there and hope nobody takes it. And nobody did, and we're going to get to what happened. So at this point in time, you had that little rail line that was a branch that brought passengers from Alliance to and from Scottsbluff. But the problem that the Westervelts had this day was the next train going from Scottsbluff back to Alliance was a cargo train. So he can't get on the train. It's just not happening. It's a cargo train. You're not getting on it. And there were no more passenger trains that day. How the heck are you going to get the suitcase? So Gene was the editor of the Republican newspaper at that point in time, and he had quite a bit of pull in town. And if I have not bored people with those stories yet, I've been given a great amount of privilege to go places and do things that I shouldn't normally be able to do, and I'm just the reporter. Mm-hmm. Your editor has way more pull. And we're talking 1900 Scottsbluff. It probably wasn't hard to convince the train conductor to say, hey, man, I got to get this suit for my brother's weddings tonight. And, it's coming on the train from Alliance. Please let me ride on your cargo train.
Well, you also have to think it wasn't cheap. The rail lines were just coming out. It was not cheap to ride these lines.
Yeah.
Not at all.
So fortunately, Gene did not have to pay. I'm going to read a little bit again from Laughlin's article. He sat in the caboose and twiddled his thumbs until every stop had been made and cars switched, freight loaded and unloaded, and managed to reach Alliance in time to retrieve the suitcase and return on the branch line passenger train Sunday evening with the treasured wedding suit shortly before the wedding. So he gets up to Alliance, passenger train comes in, he gets the suitcase, and he's able to get back to Scottsbluff. So while Gene is bored on the cargo train going to get his brother's suit, Claude is in Scottsbluff kind of freaking out. And remember, cell phones don't exist at this time, and what exists for communication is expensive, so Claude just had to sit tight. I mean, if it was like you and I was going to get your suit, you could just be texting me, did you get it? Did you get it? Did you get it? And I could text you back, shut up, I'm not there yet. And, and then, yes, I got your suit, I'm coming back, I'll be back in, 50 minutes, whatever. But you don't have that at this point in time. So Claude's just, trust people. Yeah. So Claude's not really doing well at that point in time. So Gene gets back with the suit. Claude quickly puts it on. He full tails and white tie included. And at 8 p.m., the wedding took place in Gene and Laura Bell's parlor. The Westervelt clan was there, as well as Mrs. R.B. Mullins. I don't know who she was, but she was important enough to be there, but her husband wasn't. Mr. and Mrs. Ed Sayer, and Ada's sister Della. The Reverend E.H. Sayer performed the service. And I'm assuming he's related to the Sayers that were there. It was just close.
That's actually interesting. I know some Sayers here.
There you go.
Yeah.
So maybe it was their relatives. So they were the first couple married in what was then the village of Scottsbluff, and everybody was happy. So it reminds me of things like today. Person A knows person B, who's married to person C. Person C has a sibling or a cousin that person A meets and likes, and they date and they get married. And that's one of the frustrating things for me from not being from here, is everybody is related to everybody else. And everybody here, that's not a big deal, but to me, it drives me bonkers trying to keep straight who's related to who and how they're related.
Yep.
And I don't know if I was just sheltered or not, but I never came across so much intermingling until I moved out here.
Well, it had a lot to do with you didn't have a lot of choice. And that's still very true to this day, especially once the smaller communities, you will see a lot of what I would call high school romances that went on. Very, very common, because you don't have a lot of pickings out here. And if you grow up with these people all your life, you do tend to get fond of them.
Yeah.
And so, it's very, very common that these people are still to this day very, very interrelated.
Yeah. And I know people that, they started dating when they were 14, 15 years old, and they're still dating or married in their early to mid-20s, and they end up staying married. I mean, not all of them work out, but it is because it's a smaller place, and I'm looking at it from, I came not only from a bigger town, but there were bigger surrounding towns. Yeah. So, the surrounding towns, my hometown, if I remember correctly, is roughly the same size as Scottsbluff, but there's about 35,000 people as opposed to, there's 15 here. So there's less people, but you go to the next town over, there's 25,000 people. The next town this other direction, there's 20,000, and they're all they're all the same distance away as the towns here. Mm-hmm. But when you go
but it's New York.
Yeah. You go to Minneterre, you've got a few hundred. And if you went that far in my hometown, well, that town's got 9, 10, 12,000. So there's a bigger pool of people. And even then, I still went out of the country to find my husband. So
Well, as I was about to say, I thought New Yorkers always had a famous saying: if you don't like anybody there, just wait for the next boat. So,
so that's just another one of those little. I'm not crapping on Western Nebraska. It's just one of those things.
It's actually quite a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
When you get to them, because it can be a wonderful thing. It can be awful if you get into some feuds. Mm-hmm. But as long as you get along with everybody, yeah, it's quite cool to say, oh, hey, this person was your aunt, and that person was my school teacher, and oh, you guys all go to Christmas parties together. Wow, that's really cool. Yeah, I like that.
And it was one of those neat things when we did the story on Lucretia Green. It wasn't till then that I put the pieces together that the story we did before with T.L. Green was her father.
Yep. And then we'll get into Rebecca Winters and how the Winter family name got carried on through the female line, not just the male line. Mm-hmm. And that was fascinating, too, because the Winters families are still here to this day, largely because of that. So, yeah, no, there's very, very good. Yeah. To me, it's fascinating, and it really what makes this community a tight-knit community is all the inner relationships.
Yeah. So they're married. End of story, right? No. So let me add a few things more before we wrap up. Claude wore his wedding suit when he went to the Ringling Brothers Circus later that year because it was his only best suit. And it was basically, he had a top hat, coat and tails, white tie. So you got the picture in your head. When he walked into the circus, the gate man exclaimed to the barker standing nearby, "My God, they're coming in full dress." And
it was a big deal for us out here. Remember, we did the whole thing on Buffalo Bill Cody. Yeah. And what did he end up working for? The Ringling Brothers.
Yeah. So Claude and Ada remained married the rest of their lives. They originally lived in a small house on Avenue A in Scottsbluff, but later built a home at 1518 4th Avenue, and they were still residing there on their 65th wedding anniversary. And with my job, I just haven't had a chance to get out there. Supposedly the house is still there. I assume it probably is. I just wanted to drive over to see where it was at. I couldn't find any evidence of any children that they had, and on one document at the Legacy of the Plains, it lists Claude and Ada's birth and death dates as well as occupations, and that they were the first couple married in Scottsbluff. It also has a nun listed next to children, but the word nun is circled in pencil with a question mark next to it. And all my searches, I couldn't find any children, and that interview he did, the bit of transcript I have, I got the indication that they wanted Uncle Claude to tell his stories because there's nobody else.
Could be.
That was the impression of the urgency of that, and they decided to give it to another relative as a birthday gift. But don't worry, Gene had a whole parcel of kids, so we're good. I was
about to say, Gene must have had kids then, and that must have been Uncle Clyde. So
yeah.
So
Claude was named to the Old Settlers honorary president of the Oregon Trail Days celebrations in 1959, and they do that every year.
They do.
Yeah,
yep,
and
I've heard about that,
I just read yesterday that Eleanor, I think, is the vice president, because for whatever reason, the president seems to always be a dude and the vice president's a woman. And Eleanor is a longtime volunteer at Legacy, and she has helped me so much over the years getting information that I need. So I thought that was kind of cool that she's the vice president this year.
Yeah, that's very neat.
Ada passed away on June 30th, 1967 at age 89, and she's buried in Fairview Cemetery in Scottsbluff. Claude passed away on January 28th, 1974, age 99, and he's buried next to Ada.
It's kind of remarkable when you think about it. A man that got married in the 1900s got to see the first man on the moon before he died.
Yeah.
it's a pretty remarkable thing to see.
Yeah, imagine all the things he saw in his lifetime.
In the whole lifetime.
Yeah, and they were all huge milestones.
2 world wars, the Vietnam War, and like I said, and the space race, the fall, the rise of communism. Not quite the fall, but towards the end of it. Yeah. It must have been an incredible life.
I would have wanted to interview that guy to find all that information out, especially since he seemed to have such a good memory at 96 years old. I would have sat there and picked his brain for days.
And I am always curious how the older folk kind of went through that era, because you don't hear a lot of World War II veterans and World War I veterans out here in Scottsbluff. There were obviously many of them, and you still don't even hear a lot of Vietnam because of everything that happened with skepticism and all that. So I mean, you don't hear a lot of that. What did you guys do here during all those years of war? And then what did you guys do like when the Beatles came out? Did you guys care? Did you guys like the Beatles?
Yeah. Wait, did you care? I think it was RFK came out here when he was running for president.
Yeah.
That would have been an interesting man on the street stories, because I'm sure there's people that absolutely loved it and absolutely hated it and were indifferent. Yeah. Those would be fascinating stories to find, reflecting back as well, because maybe somebody didn't care at the time, but 40 years later, I probably should have went. Or maybe they're still indifferent. Who knows?
Hey, I remember I went to Taylor Swift before she was famous, and I can say that. And everyone, you can laugh at me all you want. But I'll remember that for the rest of my life because of how much money it costs just to go see her face nowadays. And I was just one of those people back in the day that just went and saw her. And
I was not allowed to go see anybody in New York City as a kid, and I was really, really upset. I was a huge Sting fan, and he was playing when The Dream of the Blue Turtles came out. Was it 85, 86, whatever it was? My mom...
Ask me who was born in 88.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
And, okay, it came out before you was born because I was old. My mom wouldn't let me go to New York City, and I was really upset the next day in school because everybody had the T-shirts from the concerts.
Oh.
So my husband's going to kill me again. We were living in North Carolina. We only lived there for a year. I think it was 2003. I don't know. Anyway, Sting was touring with Annie Lennox.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I looked at the tickets. The nosebleed general admission on the lawn tickets were $100. And we're still eating ramen noodle. That was his first year out of grad school.
Yeah.
We didn't have the money to go. I wish I had gone, but I couldn't afford to go. So even though I laugh at you with Taylor Swift, hey, you liked her early on. That's cool. And you got to see her.
I said, did you see Sting when he was part of the Police?
No, because okay, so I was 9, so like, no.
That's getting pretty far back.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Yeah. I did see Foreigner in concert. Do you have any clue who Foreigner is?
I've heard of him. Yes, I've heard of him. I was raised with some pretty good music. Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I just
and I didn't even get to see the concert for very long because my friend from high school, we were both really short. We were both 5'4", and he got punched in the nose, and his nose wouldn't stop bleeding, and we had to go to the hospital. So I think I saw the first 2 songs that they played that set. So
kind of like when Steven Tyler fell off stage. It's like, oh, there goes that.
Yeah. And I didn't really have to go to the concerts because I lived 2 blocks from where they held them at the county fair. And we had big name people like Metallica. I didn't like Belle Biv DeVoe, but when they were at the height of their stuff, they were there. We could literally hear them at our house. We couldn't do anything at home because it was so loud. Anyway, that's way far from the first marriage in Scottsbluff. Yes. But Gene did have a parcel of children, so the Westervelt name is still going on. When I started with this story, all I had was Lachlan's 1 3/4 information. And of the wedding, she wrote, "It was a happy occasion and received headlines in the next issue of the Scottsbluff Republican, as they were the first couple to be married in the village of Scottsbluff, and that was news." So this ties into, how we research the history of things to be able to do this. I knew the museum had bound copies of the Republican and most of the other newspapers from the area, so I went down to have a look. And unfortunately, their copies of the Republican began in 1918, so that's 18 years too late. It's not going to be there. And I wish I could have seen that paper because, your brother's the editor of the paper, and it's also the first wedding in Scottsbluff. They probably did something kind of cool. So, not to be deterred.
Well, did they think of it like that at the time? That it was the first wedding ever in Scottsbluff? I wonder if they even thought of it like that.
I don't know, but see, it would be cool to see how did they deal with it.
Or did they not even know until later that they were the first?
Oh no, they knew they were the first.
Knew they were the first.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
How much of a big deal it was to them.
So it would have been cool to see just for that. So I'm not deterred. The Scottsbluff Star-Herald didn't start publishing as a joint paper, the Star-Herald, until 1912, and that's as far back as they have. And the museum doesn't have any of the Stars or the Herald, so it was the Mitchell Star and the Scottsbluff Herald, and then they were bought and combined into one paper. So I already knew they didn't have those, so I went to check the Gearing Courier, and I didn't think I'd be able to find it. The Courier's a weekly paper, so I went to the next week after that, and this is what I found in the August 17th, 1900 edition of the Gearing Courier on the front page. So it made the front page.
Yeah.
Westervelt Slates. Married at Scottsbluff on Sunday evening last, August 12, 1900, Mr. Claude H. Westervelt and Miss Ada Slates, the ceremony being performed by Reverend Edward H. Sayer in the presence of a company consisting of only of the relatives and immediate friends of the families concerned. Claude is one of the county's steadiest and most industrious boys, and he has legions of friends who will wish him every happiness. His wife is a charming young Custer County lady, although she spent several months in Gearing and made many friends and admirers. They will reside in Scottsbluff, where Claude has gone into business and where he is constructing a neat residence. The Courier's congratulations are extended. So there you have it. First wedding in Scottsbluff. I'm just glad I wore black Dockers and a green silk shirt to my wedding at the courthouse. If I had been marrying Claude that day, I'd still just be like, dude, swear what you got on. It's going to be a funny story later on.
I think my wedding was pretty funny. We got the honor of being the first married couple since the chapel's remodel. We were the first ones. So that was kind of cool.
That's neat.
Yeah. The whole chapel got remodeled, and I believe we were the first couples that were married in the remodeled version. So that was pretty neat.
Nice. And I've written a long story about, the whole day that I got married. And, it's a story for another time. And it took place in New York, not Western Nebraska. So, but seriously, they already have a really fun story about the suitcase got lost and he wanted his suit.
You do.
Just think about how much cooler that story would have been if it was like, well, we couldn't get the suitcase, so I just wore this. 60 years later, they would be laughing about it, and Ada would probably smack him on the shoulder and be like, yeah, dude, you should have paid attention.
Well, what if he never got into the Courier if it wasn't for that suit? Maybe it was the coattails and that top hat that got him in there.
Yeah. But anyway, that's it for the first wedding in Scottsbluff. We'll be back next week with another story. I do not know which one I'm going to do. I have like 5 options, and I hate when that happens because usually by now I've already decided I'm going to do this one, and I'm already working on it, and I'm not at that point. So,
you'll know when we know, folks.
There you go. Come back next week.
Thanks for listening to Storytelling on the Plains, a podcast about the history of Western Nebraska. If you enjoyed this episode, visit our website, storytellingontheplains.com, where you can subscribe to the show through a variety of podcast hosts so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to support the podcast, visit patreon.com/storytellingontheplains, where you can get the episodes early and bonus content. You can also help promote the show by sharing the podcast with others, posting social media, or leaving us a rating on Apple Podcasts. Until next time, thanks for listening to Storytelling on the Plains.